Hello, everyone. Welcome to Gaming Mechanics, a podcast seeking to explore the unexplored topics of games, how they work, and why we love them. Today's episode is on psychological horror, and with me always is my co-host Greg.
Hello.
And we have actually a special guest who we've previously had on the show, Xander.
Hey, everybody.
Yeah, we got 3.
So, yes, we wanted to include Xander because he joined us for our playthrough of Doki Doki Literature Club, which you can see on Steam. It's all right there for you to watch if you want to join us for that adventure.
Twitch.
What did I say?
Steam, though. You said Steam.
I did say Steam. The
It's
game
on
is
both
on
Steam and
Steam. The recording is on Twitch,
Yes.
and also YouTube probably at this point. But we're actually going to start off with a discussion about psychological horror in general. This is a bit of a flip from our typical format where we talk about games and our experiences in them first, and then branch into a more abstract discussion. But we really didn't want to spoil Doki Doki Literature Club for anybody who wants to hear our discussion about psychological horror first and then go play the game. I highly recommend that. It was a fantastic experience. The other two guys can vouch for that.
Yeah.
Cannot stress that one enough. I mean, like it's unfortunately it was good enough that I feel like we are like just morally obligated to talk about it on the cast.
Yes.
But it's also a remarkable experience and one that needs to be done completely blind, if possible. So read nothing about it. You can visit the Steam page and look at the official stuff and the screenshots and the trailer, but that's it. Don't look at anything
It's not
else.
over till the credits roll.
Yep, exactly. Yep, and do not stop until the credits end.
Right, you'll know when it's over.
Yeah. Well, you might think it's over, but you'll know when it's over for sure.
Yes, and it's worth saying that there is disturbing content in the game.
Yep, I did want to talk about that too, which was
go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, just as you know, I've talked a lot about my psych background, Mark being a licensed counselor, Xander being an all-around good human being.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. Well, he's an unusually kind person, in my experience. But point is, the game does have the warnings you'll see, that says disturbing content, and not for children or easily disturbed. That is, I actually can't quite stress that enough. Again, without getting too into it, because I don't want to spoil things. It does, there's kind of this internet culture of people being triggered by things, and that being kind of this joke, which probably to an extent that's a whole big discussion. But there is a reality that people who have experienced some pretty traumatic things can be triggered back into PTSD symptoms through images and sounds, and there is potential in this game for that to happen. So do tread cautiously. Like I said, it all 3 of us were able to play it just fine in terms of, but there's some legitimately disturbing and not like gross, but like very unsettling, disturbing content in terms of mental health issues and stuff of that realm. True psychological horror, actually, which is we're going to talk about far deeper and potentially like truly disturbing as opposed to like scary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think that's a great segue into talking about, what do we mean when we say psychological horror?
Right.
Because it's quite different, and it's obviously still fear-inducing, but it's very different than the sorts of horror that we experienced with Outlast or, a game like Resident Evil 7, where it's zombies in your face, monsters coming at you, you don't know if you're going to live or die.
Yep, very much. And you're even, most horror movies seems like most horror medium is truly something more in that survival horror that we talked about last week.
Mm-hmm.
Where it is, or the slasher genre, where it is very much about the horror of the events on screen, and they're very much in your face. Stephen King's It, that we talk about all the time, that I loved, is a great example of that. There's great tension building, but then all the scares had this ridiculous, huge, intense payoff. That was super in your face, super loud, super scary. And in general, I'll say, for Outlast, like after I played Outlast, I was spooked. I was quite spooked. But the next day I was fine, It has some psychological horror elements to it, but fewer. Or watching, something like I don't know, what was another creepy movie? Oh, like the original, the Friday the 13th, right? Classic slasher. Um,
Hmm.
that being said, I think true psychological horror kind of gets into your mind and burrows there. And I still, even as we were doing pre-show and talking about Doki Doki, I still feel
Hmm.
unnerved by that experience we had yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was struggling even like yesterday to like go to sleep. Like it really
Yeah,
like
yeah,
affected me in that way. Like I had a hard time
yeah,
like not thinking about it, because it gets in your
totally,
head. It's
totally.
not. We talked about this before. I think a difference between psychological horror and like a horror like more like actiony or gory is that the more actiony ones are over when the moment is over, and the psychological stuff tends to stick with you a bit longer, and you think about it
Yeah,
more, and it kind of grows as it like sits in your mind and has more time to kind of
exactly.
like incubate, I guess.
Yeah, it burrows and festers.
Hmm.
Whereas like a game, where you're trapped in an asylum full of crazy people, which is what Outlast was, the longer you're removed from that experience and you're in an environment like your house where you're just safe and nothing crazy is happening.
Yeah. Oh, I'm
That,
not in an asylum
Right.
right now. Oh, still
right.
not in an asylum. Like,
Hmm.
It sounds silly, but like the
look at
way that your
this.
brain
No, that's how that
actually
works.
works, like the survival mechanisms, just they go on high alert, and then once you're out of that environment, they calm down,
Yeah.
and so like the fear really diminishes. Whereas the sort of fear you're talking about, Xander, where it's more of an idea, more of a concept that really works its way into your head, the more that you think about it, it's very different, and it actually can get worse over time instead of better.
Exactly. I think that was one of the main thing. One of the first things we actually talked about, right, even right after the stream, was difference seems between this game. Outlast got better the longer we had distance from it. Uh, Doki Doki so far has not gotten like it. If anything, it got worse the more
Yeah,
you thought about it,
absolutely.
Yeah.
as opposed
Um,
to the Outlast kind of Dead Space style. And then Amnesia, like God, Amnesia is such a weird. We talk about that all the time. We won't talk about it too much today, but that definitely has psychological horror elements.
right.
I'd say it's primarily survival horror with some heavy psychological leanings, but Amnesia is really a hybrid game. I feel
Hmm.
like it
Yeah.
touched on a lot. That's probably why it was so successful
Yeah.
and so good, is because it really sampled a lot of different types of scares,
Hmm.
and worked to overload kind of all of your coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I think
just
Amnesia just gets
before,
a free pass whenever we talk about horror. It's like, oh yeah, and Amnesia did that too. Like,
Hmm.
yes.
Well,
Well, just before we go any further talking about psychological horror without defining it,
oh
I
yeah,
will say just in summary. So psychological horror generally tries to demonstrate that man's greatest danger is his sanity. Like the thing that you are really the most afraid to lose is the control of your own faculties and your own mind,
yourself.
and it demonstrates that how plausible it is. I guess almost a thesis for psychological horror could be found in what the Joker said in The Dark Knight, that madness is like gravity; all it takes is a little push. And the
Yeah.
goal of psychological horror is to demonstrate both the plausibility of that push, and then to really amplify and to show you the consequences, right?
And then
To
push hard.
what happens when you fall
Yeah,
after the push, and to make that just look crazy.
exactly.
And so like that's like, for example, the movie Inception, it could have been shot as a psychological horror movie. Like the idea of
Oh, for sure.
Leonardo DiCaprio's wife thinking that her world is an illusion and then eventually coming to kill herself because of it. That is very much the content of
You get
psychological
out of it.
horror. Now that isn't it's the movie isn't shot that way, but that is an idea that could be used.
Shutter Island, on the other hand,
That
is
actually
another
does
Leo
that
movie that
actually does do
actually
that
is
exactly.
shot
He
that way.
likes those movies, I guess. But
Yeah, apparently he did at that time period. It was late 2000s.
but I didn't want to cut you off there, Xander. I just wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page with psych horror.
Yeah, yeah.
oh yeah, no worries. Felt super valuable. I was just gonna say we were talking about how a lot of games we talked about or even movies have like hints of like psychological horror. And I think it's pretty challenging in general to have a game that is like straight
Yeah.
psychological horror. We tried to think of
Yeah.
some together, and I don't know if we found any that we'd have all played or even heard of that were like pure psychological horror. It's kind of interesting.
Closest one I think was Silent Hill 2 was notable for the main portion of the disturbing content being a huge realization that you have that makes you rethink everything that happened in the
Mm.
game. So that one's definitely got a lot of survival horror to it too. But I think that's a very famous. That was like the only one I could think of when I was thinking of like straight psychological, and that's not even straight psychological.
Yeah,
so.
I think it's rare, and probably because it's so difficult to make like a game in that way. Maybe more so easier with movies, which is kind of what we were talking about with Doki Doki. Kind of blurs that line a little bit of like, is it a game or is it an experience? Which makes it easier for it to fall into that psychological horror category, I think.
No, that's a really good point. Is that it's possible the psychological horror is actually potentially best done as a movie or as a book. I can see books actually being incredibly adept at that, just because there's just necessarily more internalization that you have to do, and games. So yeah, no, that's a good point. So Doki Doki, again, we'll give a pretty clear spoiler like when we start talking about the game and spoil things. We're still gonna avoid that, but it's not a spoiler to say Doki Doki is a visual novel, right? It's very, very low amount of interactivity.
You'll do a lot of reading.
If you've ever done any of those, exactly. Yeah, it's mostly clicking through dialogue in large part and making a choice or two. So that's a really good point, Xander. Actually, I hadn't thought of that. It's potentially the very mechanic of that genre is well suited to it.
Yeah.
And the other thing about psych horror, I think that is important that we were talking about was it's also harder to do in large part because, and this kind of goes back to what Mark was saying about Outlast, right? Outlast, unless we have been wildly, and this is kind of the point of horror, like maybe there is a place, I will bet every cent I own that there's not actually an asylum out there that has done experiments on their patients that led them to be weird Satan-worshipping
half humans,
zombie cancer things, right? That doesn't exist. That's not real, right? And we can fortunately say that and demonstrate that. The idea of psychological horror is, in general, because it is trying to get at something inside, internal, I think it just has to be necessarily more grounded, right? You have to be able to connect with it. You have to begin putting yourself into it and placing yourself in the shoes of the characters, or rather, you could understand why this would happen, and that's why it actually sticks with you. And so I think necessarily most psych horror isn't going to have those crazy supernatural elements to them. It'll probably be something that's kind of the point, right? Is that like it's these crazy, weird, horrible things happening, but it's all plausible and real, and you could see how that could actually happen. And that, in and of itself, is the terror and the thing that sticks with you and has to make you think. Right? The second Outlast was done, I was like, yeah, great. This is I will never have to think in this way ever again.
Like, to your point, I was never reminded of anything like about Outlast after we played the game. Like, maybe if somebody like slammed a door too hard, I would have, thought about Outlast again. But
right. If I was edging between two bookshelves.
Actually, after playing Doki Doki Literature Club today, somebody said, I'm useless. I showed up too late to help. And I immediately thought of, just really dark things because of the game that we've been playing and because of how plausible the connection is to people in your real life, because it really plays on this, the unknowability of people's internal worlds and even to themselves sometimes, where it's like people don't actually sometimes know how close they are to really dark thoughts, or that they're covering things up. And it really does a great job. Psychological horror at its best does a great job calling attention to the little things that people say that hint at not everything being okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great thought.
Well, I was just going to say, even the setting of like those games are drastically different too. Like Doki Doki takes place in a high school on Earth, and it's like very like, I don't know, it's more an experience we know, as opposed to, like you said, for Outlast, like no one's experienced that. So
Silent Hill is notable for being again, it wasn't a remarkable setting. You were just in a town. It was a normal place. It's a super suburban, normal, relatable area that was just covered in fog. And then horrible things happen there, as opposed to like Resident Evil, where you're like, in this crazy ass mansion with all these traps and an underground robot lair, and
I hate it when I find myself in an ass mansion.
Crazy. That's a fun game for you at home, by the way. Whenever it's one of Mark and I's favorites. Whenever someone uses ass as like a suffix, like crazy ass or dumbass or weird ass, move the hyphen to the noun, so after the fact. So like it's a crazy
as opposed to
ass mansion, or like it's like it's like a weird ass tree. It's like a weird ass tree, which
And
is,
now we've said ass more on this podcast than any other podcast.
I know,
Yeah.
and now we've
Put
sworn
that
more.
explicit tag back
Yeah,
on this podcast.
I
Uh,
know. Yeah. um. So yeah, what
You're stuck on
stuck
hyphens.
on ass
Uh,
jokes.
well, I
Yeah,
think
basically.
that pretty well summarizes
Horror, yeah.
psychological horror. Or do we have any like more
Yeah,
thoughts or games to
yeah.
relate
I
to
think.
before we jump into
I mean,
Doki?
well, it's a lot easier for me to think. Weird sons. It's a lot easier for me to actually think of psychological horror movies,
Sure,
or ones that have that element. Like, I mean, again, actually, I'm just Nolan,
absolutely.
right? Is masterful at that in terms of. Inception has those levels. It's definitely strong. Memento
Interstellar
has
has
very
some of
strong
that.
psychological horror underpinnings. Yeah, actually, I haven't seen that, but I'd imagine. And then classics like Silence of the Lambs is actually notorious for. There's actually very little gore in
Yeah,
that
that's true.
movie. That was kind of more thriller. Anyway, it's easier for me to, or Shutter Island. Super. I actually really like psychological horror movies, and I think I've seen
Yeah,
a lot more of them than I've played games. Um, so it's a lot easier for me to think about that, and I think, and we'll get to that in a little bit when we talk specifically about Doki Doki. But one thing that we've talked about in general with horror games is just the necessity and obviously just the uniqueness of the medium being the fact that you have control and power, and so that dance that horror games have to do of giving you power and then taking away power, because that's kind of that's where
mm,
horror really lives, is feeling powerless. And it just makes sense to me that games would be so much harder. It's much easier to manipulate that in a movie, where you can withhold information and there's no agency on the viewer, as opposed to um, in a gameplay setting where to achieve that psychological aspect,
right,
like we did talk about, like it sucks to have to make the choice to go
right.
into an unsafe place as a game, right? That's why some games have been more horrifying. But in terms of getting inside of someone's head and their ability to the way they're actually thinking about what they're doing, that's got to be a lot harder because
Yeah,
you have so much more freedom
yeah.
as a player,
Right.
and so hence a VN game where you have very little actual freedom seems to be the best place
And
to mess you
Yeah,
up.
I think that's a great point because like you can't delay yourself because there's not a whole lot to do. Like especially with
Yeah,
the
we
visual
couldn't.
novels, just I just click. That's the mechanic. But like when I watched
Yeah.
you guys play Outlast, like you both had coping mechanisms to slow yourself down and like take control of the
Yeah.
situation. Like Greg would read stuff,
Yeah.
or like Mark would sometimes just hide for a
mhm,
really long time.
Yeah.
And so
cry in a corner.
it's like
We sound like such
yeah.
losers.
So, but like with this one, you can't. It didn't need that. Like, oh, it's making you do things. Like, because all it was just that wasn't what it's trying to do. I guess it had
No,
a different
I
goal.
do
No,
think
totally,
that you're right to bring up
totally.
pacing, Xander. And like in a game, it's so hard to make a game where the player can't, at the very least, just pause and collect themselves. Like to make a game where you can't do that is
Yeah,
really hard. And you know,
Hmm.
yeah. Doki actually
yeah,
succeeded in that,
which
by the
is
way,
impressive. But I think that sense of being swept along
which we'll
and
get
not
to.
being able to gather your thoughts is an important part of psychological horror because you want the audience to experience
Sure.
some of the
Yeah.
psychological unraveling that happens to the
To be
character.
off. Yeah. Yeah. To be confused. To be totally out. Yeah. To have something kind of unknowable or that you can't quite
Right,
comprehend or put together or make sense. That's exactly it, right? That those feeling, and honestly, the longer that you have, the more usually people
right.
will be able to do
Which
that and put that together. But in those moments, you're right. You do want to be swept and confused and disoriented and this kind of like Lovecraftian
right.
otherness, right? That we've talked about, like this kind of uncomprehended. I have no idea what's happening. I don't know what's going to happen. How to expect that's going to happen. Goes back to
Mm,
that expectation thing that we talked about. Knowing that something horrible is coming, but having absolutely no clue
right.
what
But
form it's going to
knowing
take.
that it's ultimately inside of you, like psychological horror is brilliant because it takes that
Yeah.
Lovecraftian otherness and it puts it in your own head. Um,
Right. Yeah.
so
No, that's a good point.
yeah, let's just jump right into the Doki
I think
alert.
yeah, this will be spoiler territory for those. And seriously, guys, like it's if you have any tolerance for this sort of thing, it's worth it, man. It's something else. It's free on
Hmm.
Steam. It's entirely free. It took us like probably 10 hours, but we were three people and we were doing it slowly and streaming.
Yeah.
So I think 6 hours is tended to be
Right, yeah.
closer to what it should
Yeah,
be.
it's definitely like one of. I think it's brilliant and is jumped up to one of my like favorite gaming
Which is
experiences.
really ironic because
It's hard to say what's my
we
favorite
won't play
game,
it again.
but
But
right, exactly.
Oh, yeah, I'll never touch that again. It's definitely got to be up there as one of the most memorable gaming experiences I've had. Period. And I've been playing my whole life. So that means something to me.
Yeah.
All right, so hard cut here, and
spoiler time.
Spoiler time. All right. So the name Monica will forever be just burned within my head as something to run away from.
Yeah. Does someone want to just give a quick like overview of the game for those who are just decided they don't care to be spoiled because they're not going to play it?
Sure. Right. Yeah, because they're not going to play it.
Yeah, I can.
Sure.
Yeah,
you want to do that, Mark?
Give a summary to.
Yeah.
So you are a boy. We decided to name our character Bert, and you, which is awesome. And I.
Oh, how young and naive we were! We were like, "This is gonna be fun. We're gonna be better than the game."
And
like,
so
we're gonna be silly.
It did.
The game can't touch us. And then go watch the stream, and Xander and I actually clutch each other at one point.
Yeah.
Like we grab each
so
other.
you have a friend in the beginning who introduces you to a literature club, and then you join the club. You're flirting with all these girls. There's 4 girls in the club: Monica, Sayori, Natsuki, and Yuri. And you're the only boy. You get the sense that they all want attention from you, and things go on for a little while. There's a pretty big lull in the beginning where you're writing poems. The poems get a little bit darker, and you get this sense that not everything's quite right. And then there's a couple key decisions that you make as the plot progresses that have a weird effect on your best friend of 10 years, Sayori. And she starts to become more withdrawn, talk to you less. You start to wonder what's going on. You come over one day when she doesn't come to literature club, and you have a conversation with her, and she expresses to you that she's been very depressed for the last few years, and she hasn't been able to talk to anybody, and it just feels like it keeps getting worse, and there's nothing that she can do about it.
Her incredibly bubbly personality is in fact just a front for extreme.
Right. Yeah, it really is hard to capture all the nuances.
They mentioned throughout the game. It is. Yeah, it is. It's a very, very, actually, that's part of the reason it's potentially disturbing is that it's, as someone who struggled with mental health issues myself, / been in that field, it's a frighteningly accurate representation of what real mental illness looks like.
Right.
Yeah, and
she's very bubbly. She's very outgoing. You're sort of like, you're close to her, but you get the sense that she wants more from the relationship than you do. And so there's this like awkwardness of, hey, do you want to like walk home every day and like be in my literature club? And you're like, yeah, I guess, but it's not like that. And then
you're also kind of courting the other 3 girls in the club.
You're trying to get everybody.
Yeah.
So Sayori's feeling kind of, seeing that. She invited you to the literature club so that you spend more time with her, but then you start flirting with these other girls, and she gets kind of upset.
And it's worth noting that, like, up until the point where we kind of start talking about depression, the game plays incredibly classic visual novel. Like, power tripping, like, neckbeard style, I have control over these women, and they desire me because...
Yeah, they're all inordinately attracted to you for no reason.
Bodies of adults, even though they're 13.
Right.
It's like...
Exactly, right. It's incredibly developed, and some awkward sexual comments are made. Even some of the language, we were like, okay, this there's no way that this was...
Yeah, no... Yeah, you would think.
So I think
you'd think that you were the only boy at the school. Like, I mean, like literally, yeah.
Oh,
so
and planet. And they're all like gorgeous, right? Like Monica is like the most beautiful girl and super athletic, and Yuri is this just ridiculously pretty, thoughtful person, and Natsuki is this fierce, independent, fun, cute thing, and like it's just all just kind of these caricatures of
yeah, and so they're all vying for you. You're responding. Sayori's feeling like, this isn't. I'm not she's conflicted because she wants you to make new friends, but her depression gets worse when she sees you spending time with these girls because you're not spending time with her. But also when you try to spend time with her and pay attention to her, she feels bad because she is convinced she's worthless. And so she feels guilty for taking your time and attention and sympathy. And so literally nothing you do can help her feel better. And so the darkest part of the game occurs when she doesn't come to literature club. Monica actually has an aside with Sayori at one point, whispers something to her. You're not sure what it is. And then later on, when you go to visit Sayori, she calls out to you as you leave the club for you not to strain yourself as you go to get her. And you walk into her bedroom and see her hanging from her ceiling. And so that is by far the most disturbing image in the game. And we took...
Easy. And you know it's coming too, man. Like, it was a really slow build. But it does start to get darker, especially when Sayori starts talking about her depression openly. And some of the poems that the girls are writing are getting noticeably dark. And then she doesn't show up, and then that freaking comment from Monica.
That's when you knew it was coming.
Like, we knew it was coming, right? Yeah. Like, you enter her house and you call out and she doesn't answer, and you go upstairs and you knock on her door and she doesn't answer.
Yeah.
And then
and if you watch the stream, that like reaction, at least like I believe it was honest for all of us, like we screamed. Like it was horrible. It was like incredibly intense. Like that our reactions of like horror are very very legitimate, and
that was less horror to me, and like that's different than some of the jump scares that you watch when Xander and I clutch each other. That one it was revulsion and disgust and the primary emotions as opposed to
it's a better nuance of that for sure.
Which is far worse in my opinion. Truly feeling I felt nauseous. I mean I felt sick.
Same.
Seeing that and being party to it.
So after that happens, that's kind of the big turning point in the game when it really goes from everything is like a little bit on off to okay, now there's some stuff going on here. You immediately become suspicious of Monica if you're paying any attention to the dialogue, and the game ends. It says the end. Actually,
ends. You have a short monologue. Blaming yourself for Sayori's suicide. You take responsibility for it, and you had one choice you could make that either way would branch to her killing herself, but depending on which one it was, it'll make it specific to I should have done the other one. And then and you despair and say F the literature club, and
black screen, white text, the end.
And then you are presented with a new game button that's garbled, but it's where new game used to be, so you go ahead and click that, and
well, and the opening screen has all four girls on it when you first the menu.
Sayori's garbled.
Except for when you reload it, Sayori is distorted and she's an amalgamation of the other four girls.
There's also
this horrible.
This is where the fourth wall breaking starts to happen in this game, which is a huge piece of it. Like when you see the image of Sayori hanging as well, there's like an exception, like a code exception, like on the screen. It starts to
I forgot about that.
Present itself as like the game is breaking / glitching. And you see all this corrupted code is what it looks like.
And to the point where Xander, you thought there was a real exception in the game. You pointed it out to me.
I did, yes. I thought it. Yeah. Well, the game also is a little unstable. It crashed a few times on us, and so
that's true.
I legitimately just thought, it just broke. Like, what a horrible time for it to
we got something. Yeah, it's true. Well, and it uses, you guys said, I'm the only non-computer programmer here, but it uses like legitimate code, right?
Yes.
Like when
it gives you line numbers, it gives you real commands. Like it's.
So it actually looked like the game.
It even prints out like a trace file, like in your directory, and with some fake text, and it's very well done in terms of how the crashes and the glitching look. So at that point,
all right, so let's keep on going. At that point, we could just talk about this forever. So let's just
at that point you start a new game without Sayori. In the beginning, you go through a similar intro sequence, but without Sayori there, the whole thing just glitches because there's no Sayori to talk to, and you end up in the literature club because Monica invites you instead of because Sayori invites you. and some things kind of proceed as normally. It's very eerie though because Sayori's not there, and you're like, now I'm experiencing all the same things, but without her.
Creepy as
Yeah, really
fuck.
disturbing.
Yeah.
It's literally the exact same lines of dialogue that are suddenly terrifying to read because you have no idea. At this point, you begin like this is where the psychological origins picking in. There's nothing scary that's really happened. I mean, you had that horrible image, but then you go back into the game and you start playing it, and it's like right back to its original like normal tone, but it like feels horrible to play. Like it feels wrong. It feels disturbing, and it's literally the exact same lines, which is
Yeah. Well, and lines that we like were like laughing at and saying in funny accents before are now very scary.
Yeah, right.
It was an incredible tone
Yeah.
shift. If you ever get a chance to kind of skip through the stream and watch
there's
bits,
a huge
you'll
tone
see
shift.
Yeah,
how different.
Yeah. You'll see
our countenance and just like
adapting.
it's all very different. It's interesting.
So at that point, you continue through some dialogue. Things unfold a little bit differently. The whole thing is compressed. The second playthrough doesn't take nearly as long, and things start developing with Yuri. It's pretty clear at this point, at least in our playthrough. I don't know if there's other ways to play through where Natsuki is the person who.
There's actually a
really?
major jump scare that we missed. That is, if you pick Natsuki in the second playthrough, you'll eventually get to the point where Yuri commits suicide too. But you'll have a moment, you'll have a full fail state where Natsuki, the game will freeze. Natsuki's eyes will change and go wide. And it'll begin zooming in on her, and then her neck will break, and she'll scream and fly at you.
Oh my god! Really?
Yeah, and then it'll give you endgame. Yeah, so we missed that,
Thank
which
goodness.
sounds like actually the worst
we really
scare
missed
of the entire
that.
game. So regardless, you'll fail the
So
second
somebody
playthrough
will
as well. There'll be a much darker tone. You'll begin seeing different text as if someone else is
Monica
writing
intrudes on
text into the
conversations.
game,
She'll block
almost.
dialogue windows. She makes it very clear,
Yeah,
that she wants you to pick her. That whole just Monica. Actually, that's Act 3. We're not there yet, but it's pretty.
Yeah.
Suffice it to say, the game starts to come apart at the seams, seemingly, and it's clear that Monica is very much something is manipulating this game and overriding things and making these girls act different than they normally would.
Yeah, and if I could interject one, I think important plot point is that in the initial playthrough, Monica is not one of the girls that you can woo. She's and this is kind of typical in a lot of visual novels. There'll be other girls that aren't like a part of like the three that you could like win affection for.
Right, whatever
and so it's just key, I think, that she didn't get to be a part of that in the original game. So
Yep. That of all 4 girls in the club, the only thing you can do is write poetry, basically, and the only one that you can't write poetry for is Monica.
And so things start to come off the rails. Yuri or Natsuki will also kill themselves because of some stuff that you've done and said. And at this point, the game kind of enters its final act, where
at this point, the game had been glitching. There's one point where you have to revert to a save, and then the save won't be the same. It's deleted your saves multiple times at this point. Sometimes it'll loop, and you'll play the same sequence again, exactly as it was.
It's really hard to capture in a summary because the summary is very linear, but it's very jumpy.
Yeah.
And then eventually you end up with Monica. You and Monica are just sitting at a table, and she basically explains to you that she has been manipulating this whole simulation in order to try to get you to pick her, but you never did. And so she had to basically make the game unravel more and more in order to get to you, and then she finally did. And so you're sitting there with her having a conversation, and she starts actually addressing you, the player, not Bert, not your character that you've been playing as, and starts to talk about how you guys can be together forever and how it can be great. And obviously you don't want anything to do with her at this point because you've seen the terrible things she's done to these other girls in the game. And you have to
She takes responsibility for basically manipulating all the girls to killing themselves. She is manipulating the game files to make their personalities more extreme, so that their natural issues became
the amplifying, the Joker's push. She is the push, and so
Sure. Yeah.
she kind of
She was
caused
just
these girls to go mad, and it hints a few times about how you could modify game files, and that's actually what you have to do to progress further at this point. You have to delete her character file, and she screams
Right.
out and she protests, and then you actually can play the game with
Disappears. And by that, we literally you go into
Yeah.
go into Windows, you exit the game, and find
and delete
her
it.
.chr file.
Yeah, you're like
Which is
modifying,
very
Into your
yeah,
impressive.
game files in the Windows Explorer. It's really cool. Yeah.
Very
Damn
fourth wall
cool, man. That
breaking.
was
And then you go
damn
through. There's
impressive.
actually a fourth playthrough where you start, or third, depending on how you count, where you start the game and there's no Monica, and everything's very happy and very, and Sayori's back and
Everyone's
everything's
back.
great, and then Monica intrudes one final time. I guess it's not necessarily Monica,
Well,
but something intrudes a final time.
no, Sayori just goes insane
Yeah.
this time instead of
It's
Monica. Monica's location as like the narrator of the game and the president of the literature club gave her that like omniscience, her ability to like know that she was in a game. And so this time Sayori's the president, and it goes great. And then Sayori begins going insane too, and in the same way. So then Monica kind of comes from the other wherever she was deleted to, and
Yeah, ends the game.
shuts
And you
everything
get a
down. She
message
turns off the
from
game.
Monica.
Mhm.
She actually
Crashes
Monica
the
will play
game.
a song for you. That's been it's
Yep.
so great
Chilling
because
as
you've been
all
hearing the
fuck.
melody the entire playthrough. At least I was. And then she puts words to it at the
Yeah.
end, and
There's no dialogue in the
yeah,
entire
no
game up to
recorded
this
human
point. This is the
voice, and
first
then you
human
hear
voice you hear.
her, and then there's a note from Monica
Singing to you.
about how, and this is an extremely, I think, prescient for understanding the point of the game. But it talks about how there's no love at the literature club. There's no happiness to be. Yeah, there we go. There's no happiness to be found at the
here, right?
literature club, and I had to shut it down. It wasn't good. It was just causing pain, and so it's done now. And then the game literally prevents you from.
Yep.
You can no longer play the game. It says there's an error in the game, and you have to
There's an error message.
reinstall. And if you try to exit out of the game and come back in, you're presented with the same
Yeah.
screen. It has reached
just
its
give it an
final
error
state,
message.
and there's no
Yeah,
more
credits.
game to play.
Yeah. So you can uninstall it entirely and reinstall the base game,
Yeah.
and then I'm sure the same thing just
yeah, you
happens
just can.
But there's no. It's a closed loop. with
So,
that
and that's
file.
very impressive for them to have achieved that.
And
Yes.
so
Yeah,
a
let's
lot
jump
to
right into
unpack here.
unpacking.
God Almighty, it was a like you said. I mean, Xander, you said right. It's less a game and more an
Yeah.
experience. Like it sounds kind of cliched. Definitely true though. Like
Yeah.
I I don't know what to start talking about, man. I mean,
Yeah. Well,
remove outside of like we're gonna be removed and talking. It was just yesterday we did this, and honestly, just talking about it again is like it's unnerving again for me to think about. But outside of like we're gonna kind of be at this intellectual level where we analyze it, but at heart, just the emotional. It was an exhausting day emotionally for me. I interacted with almost no one, and I was exhausted. Like Xander, at the end of the day, Xander's my roommate. And we just like sat on our phones together for like the last 3 hours of the night. We just like did nothing. We just chilled because we had like no ability to. I didn't even like want to play another game. I didn't want to. I've been replaying Arkham City right now, which is like one of my favorite games of all time. I was like, I don't want to deal with Batman and like terrorizing people.
yeah.
Like, I can't. And so emotionally, it was extremely taxing.
hmm
So we're gonna unpack everything that it did well and like kind of speak like removed from it, but yeah, that was it was deeply affecting and disturbing to me.
Yeah, I can second that. It was rather exhausting, and I took a while to detox after, for sure.
So let's see. What do
Yeah.
you? I mean,
I have
so
an idea of a.
what do you want to start with? Yeah.
Oh, just like a place to start would be, I think,
Yeah.
the way I really like the just the expectation that we had for the game. And like,
Yeah.
yeah, Greg, if you want to just talk a little bit about what you had to go through to even get us to play it in the first place, and like how that colored our play. We had a pretty pure experience,
Yeah.
I'd say, of Doki Doki Literature Club, that maybe not
Yeah,
everybody else would
that's a
get
good
to
point.
have, but
So when we were talking, about what we were going to do for the stream this week, and we're trying to hit different aspects of horror games, and particularly trying to keep, costs down, because, Mark and I got Outlast for free, fortunately, but, like, we're never going to play that game again, so we didn't want to be dropping significant amount of money on games that we're not going to play much, and so I just went to the Steam homepage. We were talking about doing maybe Darkest Dungeon, or, maybe dropping some money on Resident Evil 7, and so I just went to the Steam homepage for horror, and the very top of the page was this free game, and it was Doki Doki Literature Club, and it was an anime game, and I clicked it, and it had that warning in black, white text on black, of not for the easily disturbed or children, and then nothing else. Right? There's no hint anywhere, not in the screenshots, not in the trailer, not in the in-game description, of any horrifying content in the least. It looks entirely like a normal, straightforward, crappy anime virtual novel, and I was like, dude, this is horrifying. Like, this could be terrible. Like, this, like, the juxtaposition between, like, this, the jolliest, like, form of entertainment, and the cutesiest, and then psychological horror, and it had overwhelmingly positive reviews. And the very top review said, don't read any reviews, just play it blind, and you need to experience this. And I was, like, sold. And Xander, you were just kind of around the apartment, and you're like, I might join the streaming for a little bit. And Mark,
I was a little
concerned
concerned at exactly how it was going to be disturbing. Somebody added a nudity tag, and those tags are user generated, but I didn't know how realistic that was. So I was like, what are we going to be streaming? Like, how adult is this going to be?
Like straight hentai,
It's going to be some sort of weird, like, animated snuff movie that we're playing, like. So.
Yeah. So I think the only reason I pushed forward was because it was the, like, first in Steam. Like, you can't, like, I doubt a highly pornographic game would have gotten to the very top of Steam's page.
Which, once I learned that, I was much more willing to.
And I think that's when you were like, okay, let's do it. And then Xander, you came in and were like, what the F is this? And we're just intrigued, right?
Yeah, I'm very intrigued. And part of me, I'm still suspicious, because, like Mark was saying, the tags are user generated, so I wasn't necessarily convinced. Like, this seems like something the internet would troll about, right? Is to, like, put these tags on there to trick you to play just a crappy VN game. And so for the first, like,
and that's happened before on Steam.
Yeah,
all the time.
Exactly. And so for, like, the first, like, 3 hours of the game, I was not convinced that it was going to be anything more than that.
No one was.
Yeah.
We finished the first stream of the game, which we played last week, which was almost 3 hours, and none of the horror elements come in to play yet. And we were seriously, odds are we probably got trolled by the web. The only thing that, again, I kept on coming back to was the fact that Steam had categorized it as psychological horror, and you can't fake that. So we came back, and ironically, this is something else that we were talking about. Interestingly enough, so we played the one playthrough for about 3 hours, then we came back and we played yesterday for like 6 hours, and we cut halfway through the day, took a lunch break. But our cuts were roughly exactly where the acts were that we described to you, how there are 3 kind of phases of the game that are really distinct. And just sheer luck, happenstance, whatever it was, we stopped like right before Sayori tells you that she's depressed and commits suicide. For the first playthrough, and then the second, we stopped right at lunch, right before Monica takes control of the game. So we kind of experienced the game in each one of its phases, which is something else I wanted to note on real quick before we keep on going, which was the one dude did this. One person wrote and developed this game, which is insane.
Yeah, Dan Salvato.
Salvato, that was the name. Dan Salvato, which just props in every way, shape, and form to him, both for the concept, but the other thing was the execution, which was the game was so convincing. Like we thought it was legitimately just a crappy poetry game. Like he wrote so many different things. He had to write that like legitimately crummy, kind of trashy anime-esque like relationship sim, and he nailed it. Then he had to write growing horror and like intense, realistic, grounded mental health issues, which he did, and he nailed. and then he had to do basically equivalent of like a creepypasta, like our No Sleep horror like
Right.
meta narrative, which he also nailed. And if any one of those hadn't worked correctly, none of it would. The whole thing would have fallen apart. Like the project as a whole was this bizarre combination of things that he had to nail, and he hit all of them, like, and executed them correctly, which is
Oh
just a
yeah.
really impressive writer.
No, you're right. Like
So I want to give
that
props
one
there,
person
man.
was
Like,
able to do all three of those things is highly impressive. Especially when you just line it up like that. Like it's tough for somebody
Yeah.
to find somebody who can do all three well. So props.
Yeah, and as subtle as it was. So Mark, do you want, or Dan, either one of you want? I mean, talk about like, so the big, huge turning point, at least for me. We talked about the most disturbing and scariest, the most scared I was, most unnerved as an experience was the portion where Sayori kills herself, and then immediately after that, as you replay the game without her and see Yuri descending towards probably killing herself as well. That didn't keep up, actually. So that, interesting, the game peaked kind of in the middle in terms of scare. If we're just talking about pure, like,
Right.
horror-esque, then, and so you want to talk about, like,
Sure.
why that happened the way it
Yeah,
did?
so it was interesting because of the fourth wall breaking that started to come in toward the second half of the game. And it does really have three distinct acts, so definitely most pronounced in Act 3. But Sayori kill up to the point where Sayori commits suicide and you watch all that unfold in front of you. Everything is very plausible that happens. Like you're not you get a sense that she got a little push from Monica, or at least you suspect it, and that is just it's creepy.
Okay.
It's bad. You wonder why somebody would do that, but it's plausible.
Also plausible.
People do.
I mean, people
Yeah.
have done that. There's a very high-profile case, actually, earlier this year where a girl had sent texts to her boyfriend urging him to kill himself, and he did, and she's being
Yeah, it does
arranged for murder.
happen. I mean, famously, the people who are committing suicide on maybe the Golden Gate Bridge, who are thinking about killing themselves, frequently get yelled at to just get it done with because they're holding up traffic, and it's terrible to think about. But that is definitely within the capacity of people, and so at this point, everything is
Right.
very very plausible, and then
You're entirely sucked in into the game as well. We're not thinking externally at all. I was not thinking about myself, or my life, or the room. I was only existing in this world of
And
the game had
then
given me.
the game, once that error message shows up, Xander, you get the sense that actually there's something else going on with the game, like as a whole, and it calls attention to itself as a game because it's giving you exceptions and line errors and glitchy text that you're having to remember what that menu thing was because you can't read it anymore, and you're seeing garbled pictures of people, and so all of this reminds you that you are playing a video game and that something is not right with this game and things are going off the rails, so that's disorienting. But because psychological horror just depends immensely on its connection to the real world, its demonstration of how plausible insanity really is, that once you introduce the element of it being a game, once you disconnect from that reality that you've built up, it becomes less scary, less disturbing, I would say, in a psychological horror sense. There was a couple jump scares after that did have Xander and Greg holding on to each other in a very intimate way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Mark, I clipped that actually on Twitch, so I'll give that to you. You can post it on post
did
it
you
on,
really?
on the
I need to
Facebook
find
page or
those.
something.
I need to see them.
Yeah. So
That'd be funny.
I think so. The one thing I will say that's interesting is I agree with you. I think you're right that the some aspect the horror
Yeah.
is different in the second half, but there is something scary about when you're playing a game. You kind of it's in the game. And then something, at least for me personally, when it started to glitch, like the game felt like it was more. There's something about it that felt like,
Controlled.
yeah, I didn't have
Yeah.
control. Yeah, that's exactly right. Like I didn't have control over the game anymore. It was like it was running the show
Yeah.
in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And like that was just really interesting to me. I don't know what piece of horror that is, but like it was scary to me.
Well, yeah,
to not have.
I have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, just the I didn't mean to cut you
Oh
off.
no,
Yeah,
that's
was that-
that's good.
the the game goes through kind of 3 distinct stages with the acts, in my opinion, where the first one is this entirely, basically if the game had ended on Sayori's suicide, that would have been a remarkably disturbing, effective piece of media, and that would have been enough. But then it goes into the second act where you're right, there is this, so now you're completely without, all gloves are off. You have no idea what's possible in this game and what it's going to do to you and how it's going to affect you. So now you are more aware that it's a game, but there's also that horror, that added horror of that lack of control and that unclearness of what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd say where the horror finally fell off entirely for me was actually the third act, when Monica begins directly talking to you. And referring to you as the player, and you have to go outside of the game and delete things. At that point, we were, and if you watch even the playthrough, Xander and I are cowering for most of the second act, and we'd stop in the third. We are leaning in and smiling actually in the third act, because what happened. I went from scared to intensely interested and impressed and amazed at the idea and the mechanic, and I was suddenly thinking about it as a game, right? Like the realism, right? Like, again, the realism of in the first act was super, super intense, and I was totally absorbed, and yes, I felt the weight of someone killing themselves, right? Not truly, obviously, but like the idea of that, at least the hint of that, which is just unknowable. I mean, it's one of the worst things that can possibly happen. And then the second act, you're suddenly in this place where you're clear something's wrong with the game, and you're playing a game, but it's not. You're not in control. You don't know what's going on. You're still trying to figure out how things are working, and you're still in the game, right? Trying to figure out what's going on. But then when Monica addresses you and takes you out of the game, I'm no longer feeling like there's no plausibility, right? Like I'm not convinced. I as a rational human being, there's no part of me that is like, oh wow, Monica is actually in my computer addressing me like personally, and there's actual danger here, and I need to address this rampant AI.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, that's not. I knew that wasn't true. That wasn't. So there was no actual horror anymore. It was just like, wow, this is brilliant. Like she checks to see if you're streaming. Actually, she knew we were streaming, which is brilliant, right? It was like cool. So cool, and we were like, that's incredible. Like that's insane. Like go and so suddenly we're not in it at all as players. We're suddenly back in control, right? We're suddenly in complete control over a game. And the creepiness, all kind of the work they did to build this feeling of unknowedness, and there is something inherently creepy about someone who's just insane and trying to be with you, but that just pales compared to all of the work they did to make you question reality and question what's going on, and then suddenly you know exactly what's going on. Oh, Monica just knows everything, and she's been manipulating the game, and that's it.
Yeah. Well,
far less emotionally disturbing.
Yeah, and you hinted at this at the end, but I think it's intriguing to me that you can define all of the acts and scare level based on like where the control and where the manipulation is happening. So in the first act, you're watching Monica manipulate Sayori and the other girls, and that's pretty horrifying. Yeah. And in the second act, Monica is like manipulating you. She's like glitching the game and scaring you in that way. And in the third act, you get control and you get to manipulate Monica by deleting her character file, and like that's exactly kind of where the flow of terror kind of
and when you have the power in that third act is where Greg, you said you weren't scared anymore. So I think that's a brilliant observation.
Right. Yeah. Or at least that was the big turning point in the experience where I was still like unnerved by the whole thing, and I still didn't know exactly what was going to happen, but the ability to be back in control, and like I said, like being addressed as actually, it's because we were streaming, they don't do this, which is another cool check, just brilliant programming thing. But she will address you by your OS title if you're not streaming, and for privacy, won't do it if you are streaming. So if she had addressed you, Mark, as your name, I wouldn't that wouldn't have been scary to me. I'm like, I'd be like, wow, it's incredible how I wouldn't have been like, wow, there's actually someone who knows me
in my game.
We were joking, Xander, about like Monica tearing out of the computer and crawling to reality. That would have been like that's the ultimate horror. And VR is probably going to do that very soon. and also, side note, people are actually concerned that it's only a matter of time until VR actually literally scares someone to death. Actually puts them into cardiac arrest out of shock. So. I'm not. We're not.
I would never want this for a game, but I would be so intrigued and like love the idea of like when you install a game, you give it a lot of permissions on your computer. And so for Doki Doki Literature Club to like after you install the game, like, and you're done playing, for them to have injected files or pictures of Monica, like, replace your desktop background. Like, how horrible would that
Oh
be?
my god, if
Oh
you
my
boot up
Yeah.
again and
God.
then it's
Wouldn't that just
Monica?
be the
Oh
coolest
god.
freaking thing?
People,
I would lose my
yeah,
mind. But
people
like,
would
Right.
come at you with the
Yeah.
computer
yeah.
like Fraud and Abuse Act, though. Like that would not go well.
Yes, for sure, for
Yeah,
sure.
for sure.
But it would just be so cool, anyways. Really, really playing with
Exactly.
someone.
But we're talking about, like, it'd be brilliant, right? We'd be like,
Mm.
what? Like, this is so
Yeah.
cool.
We
It's
wouldn't
so
actually be
terrifying. But
afraid,
we'd,
though.
go back to that moment in the playthrough when we saw Sayori hanging, and there's nothing good or
Right, it was just
exciting about that moment, right? We were all legitimately, yeah, disgusted. So yeah, so that kind of gets into the question of, like,
Yeah.
what was the game about, right? Was the point to just horrify us and to make us feel disturbed? Was it to be this really cool meta narrative and make us be like, Dan is a genius and a god, and no one's ever thought this way
Right.
before? Oh my gosh.
Or was it to
I don't think it
rip on
was.
visual novel viewers? I think there's a few.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Was it just to shit all over the entire genre? I don't
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah,
I mean, I have thoughts, but I also don't
I've been
want
waiting
to.
actually for this to come up, and I didn't want to sort of give my thesis too early. But yeah, I think the
Right.
reason that it was constructed the way it was, it does send a very specific message. And I think that progression that you mentioned from watching a game to living the experience is very intentional by Dan Salvato. So one thing that I wanted to talk about first was the sexual parts of the game. There's a few references. There's some language. It's not really explicit stuff.
Yeah.
I
Well, yeah, but
and I
it's
think
definitely
that
present
that
and
is
noticeable,
necessary
right? Worth talking about.
because what the game is doing is deconstructing the visual novel games, and at least that's part of what it's doing. And so, in order to deconstruct that, it has to build up, as you said, Greg, a very believable poetry romance sim where you're in this cutesy literature club trying to win the affections of these girls. And so it introduces things that would be typical to that game, like some sexual innuendos and some questionable situations and some awkward,
Right. Some really questionable wording where
yeah,
you're like,
awkward comments about body
uh,
parts, adolescent stuff going on, and it builds that up, I think, very believably. Now, I contend that at the end of the game, when you see the letter and it talks about how there is no happiness in the literature club, that is the author trying to send a message to people who play VN games or maybe just games in general, that you're not going to find relationship with people there, and so ultimately you're going to be alone. Like, I think the game does a brilliant job at the end by having you sit with Monica for eternity. Like, you have to delete her character file. And if you don't, you will sit there forever.
Yeah.
Like, the game literally
Otherwise it's,
gave you what you supposedly wanted, which was
Exactly.
to be with this.
The most beautiful girl in school who just is in
Exactly.
love
She's
with you,
obsessed with you. She'll kill for you. She'll do anything. She just
Yep.
wants to sit across from you forever and
Yep.
look into your eyes. And so the game is giving you what you wanted, and then it makes
Yeah, no, that's a good
you
point.
decide not that you don't want it anymore. It makes you kill her, and
Right.
it forces and the
we're-
way that it makes you kill her. You don't kill her in the game. You kill her by removing yourself from the game, acknowledging that it's a game, and modifying a little bit of code. And I think that it's just brilliant the way that
Yeah.
that's put together.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. And two, like the other part too, like so we were talking about this, and I think I agree entirely with Mark. There's also parts how it's talking about. There's a portion at one point actually, even earlier, when she's talking to you and before it begins looping endlessly, I think. But she says, Monica says, like, why did you even play this game in the first place? Like, what were you expecting? You must be lonely. And then it
Yeah.
moves on. So I think those two comments combined, along with what she says at the end, like there's no happiness. Some people, I don't know. Some people might say it might be reaching a bit. I really think that's what the point of the game was. I think it was made lovingly for people who enjoy VN and this genre. I don't think it was made to shit on the genre or tell people they're bad. I think it was a masterful way of demonstrating that, like, yeah, if there is a level of people, yeah, why are those games so popular? It's probably because people like to live out their fantasies. But the reality is that is not reality, and that's not a substitute for actual relationship. And it's not getting what you want. Here's exactly what you want if that's why you're playing the game, and it's
Right.
not going to be it. Which is also deeply disturbing to some people. Fortunately, well, maybe I don't know. Fortunately, unfortunately, we weren't I've never played a VN before, and I don't think any of us
Right.
had, so we weren't quite that audience where like we had to think about like, oh my
Right.
god, why do I even play these games? Maybe that's why that part wasn't as scary to us, because we weren't the audience for that in some ways, right?
Or
We
like
didn't actually have to
pushes,
think
yeah.
about
Target for that.
reality. And so maybe that's why that was less. But I think I if I had to, gun to my head, had to write the paper for college or whatever, I think that would be my statement too on what the game was really about. The futility of control via virtual relationships, and just that it's
even
not
the
really
way that they like
reality
introduced the mental illness into the game, like I don't think we fully appreciate how foreign that is to games like that, because I think the whole point of the game for those
Yeah,
VNs is that like everything kind of works out, and that people, I'm sure there's some tension building and some problems, but like nobody gets horribly depressed and kills themselves. Like that just doesn't happen in a VN, and I think
Right.
yeah,
anywhere.
and so I think by calling
Games.
attention to why that was, like, if you think about why that was so disturbing in a game that's all cutesy, it's because, oh, I like wasn't expecting that. Like, I wasn't. I was.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in this world where I just don't expect bad things to happen, and maybe it will cause people to reflect on that a little bit more, where it's like, oh, like why do I want to be in this world where nobody's sad?
Mm-hmm.
Because Sayori is like the picture of somebody who's never sad,
So it'd be
very happy, very upbeat. Like if there was a poster child for the spirit of the VN world, it would be Sayori.
those games. Yeah, sure.
Right.
And then they make her kill herself. Yeah, that's good. It's a really good point.
Yeah, I think another piece of evidence to support that kind of like theory for like why the game was made is like some of the marketing stuff. We were like looking into seeing like how the game was like advertised and like presented itself. And like outside of the like splash screen at the front of the game, it says like not for children or easily disturbed individuals. The game presents itself like a completely like I'm trying to think of the
straightforward, straight up.
very normal, and like there's nothing scary about it. It just looks like a straight like visual novel, very normal. And so I wonder if there was any desire for Dan to like catch regular consumers of visual novels and have them play it and then be surprised and scared. Be very intriguing to me if that was the case.
Yeah, there's even plausible. I mean, even with that warning, people could have just been like, "Oh, it might be nudity or something," in a way that they weren't expecting. And I mean, that's God Almighty. I mean, the poor person who was expecting that and then was playing, and then that fucking happened. Like that's. I don't know if I wish that on anyone actually. In retrospect,
that's
like
that would be at least incredibly intense.
We at least knew kind of like we were doubting, but at least we were like hopeful. Right. We were hopeful that it was going to happen. And that's dude. Just go watch. It's so funny. Watch the stream and like how stupid and naive we were at the end of the first one, and like we got exactly what we wanted in the second one. I remember saying like, "There's no way this can pay off and be like worth it," and of course I was entirely wrong. And so yeah, this is one of the most masterful games at manipulating the player and the expectation and the experience as a whole. Even having no experience with visual novels, it was I mean it like I said, it's memorable. I don't know how other people will relate to it. It seems like a lot of other people have responded very positively to it, particularly since it's Steam release. But I don't feel horribly uncomfortable calling this one of the more masterful games as art scenarios that I've ever seen.
Same.
Up there with BioShock and Journey.
It's very interesting that like we wouldn't want to play through it again. But I think it was like it really is like a almost like a one-time experience that you go through, and I can't imagine if somebody were to just stumble on this game, because we were looking for horror and it delivered.
I know. And like contrast that with the closest thing I could think of that I've played was, I haven't played Visual now, but I played Heavy Rain, which was a super similar. There's more interaction to it, but it's definitely story based, and it's mostly like more like puzzle game-esque almost, in terms of you just kind of walk around and you do QETs or QTEs, quick time events. And that game I have replayed actually 3 times, and is very dark and disturbing in some places, and it's also really good. I actually really like it. I understand some people have some major issues with it. But I don't know. It was nothing. And then there's similar in this game where Heavy Rain had a bunch of branching choices, and apparently there are actually a lot of different places that different things can happen in Doki Doki. And I have just absolutely 100% zero desire to go back and find those. I'm fine reading about them, but I don't want to experience that. I don't want to experience a frighteningly well depicted descent into suicidality again. You know.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, it's very interesting because a lot of visual novels are actually kind of like the way that they're played typically, at least by kind of the more like extreme people, is that you do go get all of
you
the
go through. Yeah, that's the point.
stories. Right? You play it again and again until you hit all the arcs. Like at the end of even Doki Doki, there was like different, like you could see what CGs, like the computer graphics, like the special events that you would hit, and if you collected them all, there was like a special like
there's a
reward
line
for you
in Monica's final song where she says, "In this game of infinite choices, when will I find my happy day?" And I think that the game's message is that the answer is never. Like none of these endings are happy. Now that's slightly undermined by the fact that there is an alternate ending to the game. So there's that, but I do contend that the point of the game is that
a little bit.
Yeah, is
kind
of like, there's no happy ending here. And no matter how many choices they give you, you're still dating somebody on a computer who doesn't exist. So
yeah, man. Any final thoughts, personal reflections you guys wanna put in?
I just feel obligated to call out how impressed and blown away I am by some of the secrets that are in this game. If you go on like Reddit or any other like forum community, like just to give you a small taste, like if you take one of the character files in the game, change the extension to turn it into a soundbite, put that soundbite through an audio to visual converter, you will get a QR code. You scan the QR code, you go to a website, you get a cipher. You take that cipher and you can decrypt another character file to get a message that's Monica talking to you. Like, who would do that? Why does this exist? It's amazing. I'm like just blown away by that. So really kind of cool stuff that he put in there for the people who are interested in kind of looking really deep into like his game and his like
it
creation.
Was definitely a labor of love. I also want to, just as a, well, here, any more thoughts, Mark? I have kind of
no, I think we can, you go ahead.
Cool. Well, yeah, like I said, is incredibly unique experience, one I'm never going to forget, one I'm glad that I did and will never do again. And just like both my own story as well as just my passion for this particular, subject, both with my studies and some of the work I've done professionally. Seriously, guy, like if without sounding trite, if you're going through anything mental health wise, in any way, shape, or form, please just talk to someone about it. There's all kinds of excellent resources that are anonymous online. National Suicide Prevention Hotline is 24/7. There's all kinds of places you can go to chat. And at the end of the day, I truly mean this. If you want to email me at Gaming Mechanics, I will respond. But yeah, the dangerous part with that is just doing it alone in any way, shape, or form. And it's sweeping the world, mental health awareness, and hopefully this can be a tiny part of bringing awareness and reducing stigma to that, because it's real, and it's horrible. It's painful. So please, if this cast or anything about the game is bringing stuff up for you, find someone you know and trust, or someone, like I said, some of those resources are excellent, and just don't do it alone. So I just want to say that, because that's
that's great. I'm glad you said that. Definitely support that. And so this is an abrupt transition, but we're about out of time, and that's a good concluding.
Well, we succeed, like, in terms of psychological horror, we like successfully delved. I don't know if there's a more intense version of psych horror than that game.
Well, I would say that the only worst thing is actually living it, which is what you're talking about, Greg. So that's there are people who really do have these thoughts, and and for them, getting help is the only option. Doing it alone is not the option.
It is absolutely.
So next week, we're going to take a little bit of a lighter shift, and while maintaining our Halloween theme, we're going to do more just aesthetically dark games, not necessarily games that are seeking to give you jump scares, or games that are trying to do something horrific. Think about like a Tim Burton movie. That's sort of the thing we're thinking about and going toward, where it's like it's dark, but it's more like the darkness is a backdrop to some story that they want to tell.
It's more an aesthetic choice as opposed
to so we're going to be talking about that and games that do that well, and why even they use that aesthetic, and we'll dive into that. So we'll see you all back next week. Xander, thanks as always for joining me and Greg here.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It was a treat to be with you and to get to be on the stream too. So.
Open door, buddy. But yeah, so yeah, if I think we're all kind of exhausted by this week, and even maybe just the month of, we're gonna have 5 full weeks of horror. So I think next week will be lighter and a little bit more fun, maybe.
All right, we're gonna sign out here. We'll see you guys next week.
All right, thanks for listening, guys. Take it easy. Take care of yourselves.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode of Gaming Mechanics, check out our Twitter @GamingMechanics or Facebook by going to facebook.com/gamingmechanics. Thanks for listening.